What's up, guys? Welcome to Learning Money with Scott. Today we're going to talk about something that everyone is terrified of and downright want to ignore. This is how to budget and goals you need to keep in mind when properly setting up a budget. Alright, let's get into it. So first of all, let's start this video by acknowledging that everyone is terrified of budgeting and loves to put it off and come up with excuses why they don't need a proper budget, so they don't actually have to lay out their income, their expenses, because it's downright terrifying. But it is essential in actually hitting financial goals and planning for the future. So today I've put together 5 tips that are essential when actually planning a budget. Now I'm going to do a follow-up video to this where we go line by line and actually break down how to do a proper Excel doc or Mint profile. But compared to the goals that you actually need to think about when setting this up, setting up a proper line-by-line budget is actually quite simple. Now the first point that you need to keep in mind when planning for your budget is you need to know your goal. Now this may sound simple, but a lot of people think that the only function of a budget is to track every cent you spend. And while that's an important function of planning a budget, the reality is there's a lot of people out there who know exactly where all their money's going, and they're still not budgeting effectively. The main focus of a budget is for you to spend less money than you make. Now that might sound simple, but that needs to be one of your driving goals and focuses when you're planning this budget. So whatever your goal is, whether it's to pay down debt, buy a car, buy a house, save for retirement, all of it starts with knowing your goal and making sure that your income is higher than your monthly expenditures. Sounds simple, not so easy to do. On to point number 2, and this is a really important one. When you're looking at setting up the categories for your budget, I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. Now, a lot of people go into this and ultimately think, well, I've got to break everything down to a category to the point where they know how much money they're spending at a Starbucks on coffee. Now, while this is great to do for maybe a week, and you will get a real eye-opening experience when you see just how much money you spend, perhaps at Starbucks in a given week, long-term, I don't think the benefits are actually there. It will probably feel overwhelming if you have 25 categories where every single thing you could possibly spend money on gets a monthly category, and then you have to try to budget it. I'm just not a fan of that. I like to stick to about 5 to 7 categories. So when I'm looking to set up a budget for the first time, I like to keep my categories nice and simple. So let's start first of all with transportation. That would be car payments, car insurance, gas, maintenance. Perhaps you don't have a vehicle and it would be your Metro Pass, or how many tokens you get. Essentially, transportation should all lump together when possible. That includes train rides, any type of transportation. Keep it simple and track all those expenditures to one category. Number 2 I like to get into is entertainment. Now this can be a big one for a lot of people and probably where a lot of people go off budget, but it would include anything like food for the purpose of nights out, appetizers, right? Going out for drinks, movies, anything under that category. I like to keep all those things in the entertainment category because even if you're going out for food, you know it wasn't a food expense. Next up, I do like to do food. We're talking groceries, so that's just specifically going to your grocery store, getting food that you're going to prepare, which is always the most cost-effective measure. And follow up food with a restaurants category. Now that is where most people go way off the deep end when they actually review their budget. But I like to categorize restaurants as different than entertainment because, a lot of people like to sneak out and just grab a $5, $10, $12 meal at lunch, maybe at the office, but I still wouldn't categorize that in the same as entertainment. It's restaurants, so keep it at that. The next category I would use would be shopping. We all love to shop, and that can vary versus clothing. Maybe you want to buy some tech. Wherever it is, it really just falls under shopping because it usually goes into things that you need or you want. One month it might be a camera lens, the other month it might be a bunch of jeans. It doesn't really matter. It just goes into things that are not a fixed monthly expenditure, but you need to get a handle on how much money you're spending that way. I like to follow that category up with a miscellaneous category. Now this one also, maybe one month you need to get a bunch of Advil, or you get sick and you need to run out and get some prescriptions, maybe a light bulb in your house bursts. I like to categorize that under who knows, because you always have monthly expenses that are not reoccurring per se. They change every month, but you need to have a little bit of money put aside for whatever happens. So the last category I like to track is utilities. Now, this should be a relatively standard reoccurrence, and depending on if you live in a high rise, a house, what have you, it's going to be a lot harder for some people than others, but it really sometimes is good to have alerts go off if you really are going over on a month-to-month basis on certain utilities. Sometimes it could be an error with the way you're billed, and other times you just have to realize, wow, I spent a lot of hydro last month. All right, so that's a quick rundown of the categories that I like to use to set up a basic manageable budget. Now, of course, you're going to want a line on there for your financial goals, which we will get into later, and things like rent or mortgage payments, which should be a fixed expense. So you do want it in there, but obviously that should not be shifting around too much month to month. All right, we're moving on to our third point, which is actually the simplest of all these steps, and it is charge your expenses to credit cards. Now, you might be saying, that doesn't sound like a good idea if I'm trying to get my finances in line. The reality is that if you use credit cards properly and pay them off before they're due or when they're due in their entirety, credit cards are a really helpful tool to build your credit and just keep great tabs on where all of your expenses are going. I'll be doing a video later on credit cards, interest rates, and things that you need to be mindful of when using credit cards. But in general, if we're talking about budgeting principles, credit cards are great because they keep exact records of everything that you're spending money on. It's a lot easier to just burn through $200 in cash and not entirely know where it went. With debit or credit cards, the reality is that there's an electronic record that can be easily tracked. And in this day and age, there's a lot of tools and apps, which we'll be getting into later, that you can actually link with your bank accounts, which will just pull all that information and put it in charts, graphs, and great visual representations of where all your money is going. And as I said, there are credit implications where you can build your credit through all your expenses. And if you find a no annual fee or low annual fee credit card, you can also get a lot of rewards points on top of those purchases. So there are a lot of benefits to using credit cards and debit cards. You just obviously need to know how they work to make sure you are maximizing them and gaining money off your purchases instead of losing it. All right, we're going to move on to our fourth point, and this one to me is my favorite, and I think it's the biggest. The hard part about it is a lot of it is mentally changing how you think. And to put it in simplest terms, it's that you need to save first. A lot of people are programmed to budget and think every month that they're going to spend all their money, and then whatever they get to at the end of the month is what they're going to put in their savings account. And the problem with that is that you're actually setting yourself up for failure. What you need to train your mind to do is every month you need to have a set amount of money that is going to be coming out of your accounts towards future financial goals. Now, what this does is it makes you look at your future like a set expense. And all the studies in the world have shown this is the best way to actually achieve a goal. So regardless of where you are in you're trying to pay off debt, you are flush with cash, it doesn't really matter if you're not setting goals. So look at your budget, and wherever you land, you have to make sure that every month you have a monthly amount that is put towards the future, your future purchases, and it is right up there under the utility bill. So planning to save first instead of kind of as a last resort is one of the biggest parts of budgeting success when you're trying to change your finances. All right, we're on to my fifth and final tip. And this one's a little different for everyone, but the reality is it all comes down to using the right tools. Now, this goes back to really knowing yourself and what works best for you. For some people, they want to buy a notebook and they like to, manually track everything they spend. If that works great for you, awesome. If you're like me, where you like to automate things as much as possible and have the computers do as much work as possible, so instead of you focusing on tracking everything long term, which over months and years takes a lot of time, I'm a big fan of using online software. There's so many good ones now where all the work of actually tracking your expenses is done for you. And then you spend your time focusing on the categories where the money is actually going and working on ways to make change. So whether your tool is a notebook or you like to go with technology, make sure you're using the right one to keep you to your goals so you can visualize where all your expenses are going and make the changes necessary. All right, guys, I hope those tips gave you something to think about. I know that budgeting is not fun and no one likes to put a lot of thought into it, but really considering these different points before you get started gives you the best chance to actually be successful with your budgeting. I'm going to follow this up with a video where I go through actually setting up a line-by-line budget and setting up a Mint account, which is what I like to use. But I really hope that you learned something. If you want to hang around, join the community, and we'll talk about different ways for you to get ahead financially. Thanks for sticking around for Learning Money with Scott. We'll see you next time.